Hello everybody, Lurgs here, welcome to my channel, and today it's the Volkswagen T5 and how to access the heavy duty fuses. You'll need to open the bonnet or the hood first, link above. The heavy duty fuses are unlikely to fail unless you've got a serious problem, and that is why they're tucked away and hidden so you can't really access them easily. We're going to have to disconnect and remove the battery. You will lose some settings like the clock, unless of course you use some kind of battery saving device. As we're going to be removing the battery, it's safety first. Ideally you'd wear a pair of goggles. If you haven't got a pair of goggles, just wear a pair of sunglasses, and ideally you wear a pair of rubber gloves, but it's not completely necessary, that's just for extra safety. Make sure you switch the ignition off and remove the key. Now it's really important when you disconnect the battery that you do it in a specific sequence, and likewise later on when we reconnect the battery you do that in a specific sequence as well. And it's a good idea to have a rag ready to wrap up the terminals once you've removed them. And I've just got some old Rocky boxer shorts here. Yo Adrian, I did it, Rocky. And you're going to need a ratchet and a socket just to remove the battery terminals. If you haven't got one of these, you can just use a spanner. You need to locate the positive and the negative terminals on the battery because we're going to be removing the negative terminal first, and that is really important. On your battery there should be a negative terminal icon and there should be a positive terminal icon. If it's not immediately obvious because it's an older battery, the negative cable should be bolted to the chassis somewhere, and also the negative terminal will normally be slightly smaller than the positive terminal. What you need to do is remove the negative terminal first. Take your socket wrench and be very careful not to touch any of the chassis while you're undoing the battery terminals. Put it on the negative terminal nut and start undoing it anti-clockwise. I've got it slightly loose here, so I'm just going to do the rest of it by hand. Then take your rag, wrap it around the negative terminal, and you're just basically lifting it upwards very gently, but make sure you get a nice clean exit and just pull it off. It's very important to remove the negative terminal completely before you undo the positive terminal, because that will avoid any shorts or any sparks, which will obviously damage your computers or fuses and could also give you a nasty shock. Then wrap it in your rag and just tuck that away somewhere safely. Now we're going to do the same on the positive terminal. Undo this anti-clockwise. Again, be careful not to touch your ratchet on the chassis. Not that it matters now because we've removed the negative terminal. Then just slide off the positive terminal and again wrap this in a rag because you may still have some residual current running around the electrical circuit. The battery is now disconnected. And we now need to remove this retaining bolt which is just holding the battery in place. Take a 13mm socket. Unscrewing this anti-clockwise. This may be a bit stiff if you've never removed it. Then do the rest with my fingers. And then just remove that bracket. Make sure when you put that bracket in back later that you put it in the correct way round. So when you put it somewhere safe, make sure it goes in the same position. So I know it's going to be going back that way. And now the battery is ready to be removed. So just get a good grip on the handles. Just gently wiggle it out through the gap. Fabulous. It's just got this sleeve surround. So I just remove that as well. And that is the metal base plate that the battery sits on, and the heavy duty fuses are way underneath there, and we'll get to that shortly. As the battery is removed, I might as well stick it on charge while I'm doing this bit of work. And to remove this metal base plate we've got 4 bolts. Again, take your 13mm socket and ratchet set and undo the 4 bolts that I'll be showing here. Now you don't need to worry about losing anything. There's no nuts on the other side of these bolts. They just go straight into an open thread. So let's just remove this one first. So that is the back of the bolt there. There's definitely no nut on the back of there to drop down and disappear into your engine bay. You can see it turning there. Let's just remove this one. Now I wasn't sure if all these 4 bolts are all going to be different lengths. Sometimes they are, but generally when you're taking out bolts, always put them in the position that you removed them from. That way you'll know which way they go back in. So that one was the top right hand corner. Now I'm going to be removing the one in the top left hand corner. This will obviously be easier with 2 hands. I'm holding the camera with one hand and doing the ratchet with the other hand. That one is now loose. Let's just remove that one and place that down on my wooden tray. Now the bottom left hand corner bolt. Whilst I'm removing this bolt, there's a link above about how to replace the pollen filter on this Volkswagen T5. Ideally that is an annual job and you wouldn't believe how dirty that gets. So that's a good job to do. And you're probably wondering, yes, this is my wife's chopping board from the kitchen.
Seriously, Lurgs?
Oops, new chopping board on the way. And the last bolt is in the bottom right hand corner. I'm coming in. When I put these bolts back later on, I'll just put a bit of 3-in-1 oil on the threads just to make it easier if I ever need access to the heavy duty fuses again. And just place that on my wooden tray in the bottom right so I know where they all go. I mean, actually it turns out they're all the same length, but that's just a habit I've got into when I'm removing things. Nothing worse than putting a bolt back that's got a longer thread on it and it doesn't fit properly. Now to remove the metal base plate, we just need to remove this plastic shroud here. This is just on a plastic thread, so just undo that. Now there's 3 parts here to remove and they all sort of clip together a bit like Meccano to just make a mental note of where they all go. When I put it all back together, I'll show you how it all works. So just slide the top one outwards and upwards. Then we've got this lower one at the front. That's just a bit of protection from the heat from the engine to your fuses and the battery. Now we are ready to remove the metal base plate which the battery sits on, but that still doesn't give us access to the fuses. There's still another lid to remove, so just gently wiggle this metal base plate. It will come out, just maneuver it around. I'll give this a clean before we put it back in. There we go. That's now removed. And again, I'm just going to place this on the floor in the exact same position that it came out of the van. Don't want to spin that round or anything and put it back in, back to front, and nothing fits. And now we've got these star-shaped screws which we need to remove. These are star sprockets. So take a star sprocket and just undo these bolts anti-clockwise. Just be careful when you're removing these with your fingers that you don't drop them down into the engine bay. Classic mistake when you're dealing with anything small and you've got sausage fingers like me. And these are all the same length. And that is where they all are. And I've removed all of those. Now we just need to remove that positive terminal cable out of the way so we can lift the lid on where the heavy duty fuses are. 2 clips here, it literally just lifts up. And there's another small clip here. That just allows you to wiggle that cable around, move it about, move it into a specific position so you can lift that lid up. I'm just going to gently move that cable up into the right hand corner to give me better access. And then I'm just lifting the lid on this. Let's just move it out of the way again. It's much easier to lift it up from the right hand side because you've still got the engine fuses there which are still joined. So you cannot lift it from the left hand side upwards. And almost there for the big reveal. Boom, there we are. There are the heavy duty fuses. And you've got some 100 amp ones there, which is massive. Now these are never likely to fail unless you've got a serious issue. But if you do need to replace them, that's where they are. This should also be the same on the Volkswagen T6. Right, now let's put everything back. Push that lid down. Everything is just a bit of a wiggle and a move around and a bit of manoeuvring. And it should just pop down. And then those holes should line up from where you remove the star sprocket bolts out from. Fabulous, that's all lined up. Great stuff. Get these back in. Always do it with your fingers first, just so you don't do any cross threading. You don't want to damage any threads. Always put any bolts or screws in with my fingers first, just a force of habit, and then once you've got them going, then you can use your star sprocket tool. I'm just going to show you where all of these are. Don't want to skip any parts, I want to make this pretty comprehensive. Whilst I'm doing that, there's a link above about how to reset the service light on your Volkswagen T5 Transporter. That's really handy if you're doing your own servicing. And the final one to go in. Once they're all in, then just tighten them up with your star sprocket tool. Let's just go around and quickly tighten all those up. Just need to clip the positive terminal cable back onto the top of that, just so it doesn't move about. Just gently pushes down and clips into place. There we go. Now we can put the metal base plate back in. Just a bit of manoeuvring in here. In that top left hand corner, it goes underneath that small bracket there. And then it just drops down. Make sure you don't squeeze that cable that we've just clipped down. Make sure it comes out through the middle of the base at the front. That's looking good, looking good. So we've got those 4 bolts to go back in. I'm just going to put a bit of 3-in-1 oil on all the threads, just in case I ever need to remove them again, just make it a little bit easier. Again, just going to do it with my fingers first, just to catch the thread. These are obviously a lot stiffer because they're bigger, so I'm just going to do them with my fingers, and then a bit later on do them with the socket wrench. So the one in the top left, but don't get ahead of yourself, don't do the one in the bottom left, because we need to put the plastic shrouds back in before we put that bolt in, because one of those is actually bolted to that metal plate. So this is the bottom right hand corner bolt. Now we've got these plastic shroud protectors. You can see there where the bolt goes through that one at the bottom. We need to put this back in first. It just gently slides down and slides inwards. It should just line into place. There we go. Great stuff. We can now put the final bolt into there. I tell you what, this is thirsty work. It's time to stop for a cup of tea. If you're going to be working on the motor, always have a lovely cup of tea. Now just tighten those 4 bolts up with your socket wrench. Then this is a bit of a puzzle, but it does all fit. This just slides down. Those two are pretty easy. It's the top one which has some legs which fit on either side. This is the one that's not completely obvious. Now the two at the top I've got correct, but the bottom one I haven't. So I'm just going to come around the other side and then move that leg over this plastic shroud. And that is actually wrong at the moment. If we come this side, the leg should not be on the right hand side, it should be on this side. So just lift it up gently. There we go. That is now all correct, lined up and slotted home. Now we can just do up that plastic nut at the front. It's only plastic thread, so it doesn't need to be super tight. Just as soon as you feel it getting tight, that's enough. Fabulous. Right, let's check the battery. It's been on charge for about an hour. Just going to check it with the multimeter. It's up to 12.92 volts, and I think it was on about 12.4, so it's just had a little bit of a charge. May as well charge it while it's off the van. And it's ready to go back in. So just lift it in. Pretty heavy, but not too bad. Make sure it goes in the correct position. But don't worry too much, you can still move it about until we lock it in with the retaining bolt. Just going to slide it to the left slightly. And then put the shroud protector around the battery. Now we're ready to connect back up the battery. Now it's very important, as I mentioned right at the beginning, that you do this in the exact sequence shown here. Can't stress how important that is to stop a spark or any shorting or blowing your fuses. So the positive terminal needs to go on first, all the time making sure that the negative terminal is wrapped up nice and safely in a rag. push the positive terminal on nice and quickly. If the battery terminals don't reach, don't worry, you can slide the battery across to the left. We still haven't secured it with the retaining bracket yet. We'll do that shortly. Then tighten that nut up, being careful not to touch anything on the chassis. Then unwrap your negative terminal. And you want to get a nice smooth clean connection straight onto the negative terminal. Now you may get a very small spark as you push it on, so don't hesitate, don't like lift it on and off or be gentle with it, just get it on there as quick as possible. Just going to push that down. Then tighten that up. Then take your socket wrench, just tighten both those up nice and tight. And we now need to secure the battery so it doesn't move about by installing the retaining bolt and bracket. Make sure that goes in the correct way. Just going to do this with my fingers first. I've put a little bit of 3-in-1 on the thread. Now we're not going to tighten this up crazy to start with. We're going to just put it in nice and loose, and then you can actually move the battery about exactly where you want it. So you want the battery pushed back as far as it will go, so it's up against the metal bracket at the back, so it's nice and tight. And then this holding bracket at the front, push that up against the battery. It's got some little ridges at the bottom. Once it's pushed up nice and tight, then take your socket and tighten that up. So if we just zoom in on this retaining bracket here, you can see at the bottom of the battery you've got these small ridges, so it's just nice and tight there. Battery's pushed up against the metal bracket at the back, and that battery is not going anywhere. And just to prove that, let's just get a good hand on it, shake it about. Brilliant stuff. That is not going anywhere. That battery is now safe and secure. Then just a little tip to keep your battery terminals in decent condition. You can buy special battery paste. If you haven't got any, you can just use standard petroleum jelly. Just stick that on your finger, just rub that over the terminal. It just stops it rotting and degrading over time. Don't need a lot of it, but it just gives it a bit of protection. Putting that on my finger reminds me of last Saturday night. Ah, good night that was. If you've got a cover, put that back over the positive terminal of the battery. Don't forget to tidy up your tools at the end. That can be a classic mistake, leaving your tools inside the engine bay, starting it up, then you hear this rattling as it all falls to the floor. Now if you didn't use a battery saver device, you would have lost all your settings, so put the ignition on. I just need to set the clock. So just hold the left hand button down. When it starts flashing, press the right hand button just to cycle through the hours. It's a 24-hour clock. Set that to 12, then press the left hand button again so it cycles to the minutes, then hold down the right hand button to speed up through the minutes. When it gets close, let go and you can just push it a few times just to get it to the correct time. 12:40, now press the left hand button again, once more, and the time is now set. Now we better just check that the van still starts. So let's do that. Shouldn't be any problems at all. Fantastic. And as I've started up the beast, I might as well actually just go for a nice little drive. Absolutely love this van. In the top right there's a video on how to change the pollen filter on this van, and in the top left the OBD2 diagnostic port location, and in the bottom left a playlist of loads of videos on the Volkswagen T5 with some really helpful guides. I hope that was useful to you. Cheers!